Well, who is that masked man? Anyway, hello. We thought we were done with these things, or at least we thought we would be done with these things by now, but, that's kind of the way things go. I'm Steve Cole, pastor of the First United Methodist Church in Oswego, Kansas, and glad that you can be with me today. Today we'll have the sermon for January 16th, 2022. This kind of is about when Joseph and Mary, right after the wise men come, Joseph is told by an angel to get up and get out of Dodge, right? Go to Egypt. And so that's the passage that we'll be looking at today, Matthew 2, verses 13 to 18. Now, after they had left, that being the wise men, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up and take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This to fulfill what had been spoken of by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that they had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time they had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they were no more. May God add a blessing to the reading, the hearing, and the understanding of His Word. November 15th, 1988. I remember the day, because our son Ben was 5 days old. So, yes, I remember that day. I was, for some reason, at the time, a few blocks away from our home, meeting with the pastor of the church that we were attending at the time. I wasn't in the ministry yet, but anyway. Well, a storm came along. Susan, of course, was still home with the baby. And a storm came along, and she says that she heard sirens. Now, I don't remember. See, I was only a few blocks away. I don't remember hearing any sirens, but she said she did. And so something told her to grab the baby, take him out of the crib, and go to the basement. A few moments later, when she got to the basement, she heard a loud crash upstairs. Then a little while later, someone came calling into the house saying, "Are you all right? Is anybody there? Are you all right?" And she yelled back, "Yes, we're fine." "Why?" The man said, "There was just a tornado." And when she went upstairs, the windows of the house had been all broken out. The floor was covered with glass, as well as the crib that the baby had been in was filled with glass. How did she know to go to the basement? Well, she says she heard a siren. November, though, we don't oftentimes think of tornadoes in November, but that's when it was. We want to say God sent a message to her. Now, it was not a big tornado, it was F1, which, as far as tornadoes go, wasn't big, but it was big enough to cause damage to the house, to blow out all the windows, and blow out all the windows on our car and ruin the paint job on the car, but hey, everybody was fine. We can replace all that stuff. Now, not long after the wise men visit Joseph and Mary, Joseph has a dream, and an angel tells him to go to Egypt. The child's life is in danger. So Joseph does what he's told. And it's a good thing, too, since Herod had all the babies killed in and around Bethlehem that were 2 years old or younger. Now, we don't know how many babies there might have been. Bethlehem is a small town, but still, even at that rate. it would have been a disastrous thing that he did. And we wonder, why in the world would someone but Herod do such a thing? Well, if you know anything about Herod, he was a tyrant, a despicable tyrant. He had no problem with killing anyone. In fact, he killed 2 of his own sons because he thought they were threats to his throne. He had killed at least one of his wives and several others throughout his reign. So, for killing a few babies in Bethlehem was not a big thing as far as he was concerned. The wise men had told him that the newborn king of the Jews had been born. And he didn't want that. He didn't want the competition. So he thought he could solve the problem by doing away with all the babies, that one of them might just be that one. Wow. But God had other plans. God worked it out. Yep. Now, we don't know what Joseph and Mary had really planned on. Were they going to stay, there in Bethlehem for a while? Were they going back to Nazareth? But, they probably did not plan on going to Egypt. That was probably not on the bucket list. But it wouldn't have been too bad, because there were, other Jewish people living in Egypt at the time, a lot of them refugees like them. So they would have had other people they could have, been associated with. But still, to have to pack your bags, leave familiar territory, and go someplace new and different would have been quite an ordeal. And of course, for a lot of us, all through our lives, things happen that we might not have planned on. Things that we probably didn't even want to do or didn't expect. When we're young, we're living with our parents, and we have to go wherever our parents go. So if our parents move and go to a new location, we have to go along, right? It's just what happens. And sometimes those things happen that we didn't plan on. Now, I was born about 3 years too late to be drafted into the military, but my older brother, who's 3 years older than I am, he turned 18 1 month after they stopped the draft. But there were several other young people that, in that age range, didn't have a choice. They were drafted, and they had to go. They had to go to the military. They may not have wanted to, but that's what they had to do. My parents and my grandparents pretty much stayed in northeast Kansas all their lives. But when I look back at the life of my great-great-grandfather, in fact, my great-grandfather was pretty much stayed in my grandparents, and but my great-great-grandfather moved around quite a bit. I looked up some of the census records and found out he was born in a small town in New York State, but later, when he was older, moved to Michigan as a young man. Why? We really don't know. Then he was served in the Civil War, drafted, and he went throughout the South, and then eventually came back to Michigan, but didn't stay there. He moved to Kansas. That's what got the rest of us here, right? But the thing is, nobody ever wrote all this stuff down. Now, we think he came to Kansas, it was right after the Civil War, homesteading. A lot of, Civil War veterans took advantage of homesteading. And so that's probably what got him here. But, nobody kept that information, so we just kind of speculate as to what did. For the first 18 years of my life, I lived basically in the same, I did live in the same community, same town. We moved across the street from one house to another, but we didn't really move away. And then after I graduated from high school, there was a change. Went off to K-State. Here, pretty good size, go from a school that's, Washburn Rural High School, which today is a pretty good sized school, but then, was probably the equivalent of a 3A school, to go to K-State with thousands of people. It was a big change to do that. And of course, throughout the years, I graduated and got a job, and well, we did different jobs. I won't go into all of them, but got married. That was a big change. And throughout all this, we eventually ended up back in my hometown of Auburn, Kansas. Bought a house. And we're thinking, had 2 children. We had 2 children, fairly young. Like, this is where we're going to be the rest of our life. We bought this house. This is where we're going to stay. This is where we're going to live. So we thought. But I had a job there in Topeka. And, the company that I worked for, or the office that I worked in, moved my office from Topeka to Bonner Springs, Kansas. Wow. About 75 miles away. Well, I had a choice. If I wanted to keep my job, I had to, work in Bonner Springs. Well, I looked for another job, and I looked, and at that particular time, the early 90s, there really wasn't much of anything available, and so I drove the 75 miles to Bonner Springs for a while. So then, of course, Susan was working on her master's degree at the time in special education, and an opportunity came along for her for a job to be just outside Leavenworth, Kansas. Well, Leavenworth's not that far from Bonner Springs. Choice. Do we pack our bags and move to Leavenworth? Well, that's what we did. We went to Leavenworth. And, so I was closer to my job. She had her job, so things went along okay for a couple years until my job ended. Now we're stuck in Leavenworth, and I don't have a job. Susan had her job. But I'd been going to seminary part-time, and finally made the decision, just go ahead and get it out of the way. Go to seminary full-time, get it done. So I did, and my last year in seminary, an opportunity came along to be the pastor of a small church in Neodesha, Kansas, which, that's southeast Kansas. A little bit of a drive, but, it was a part-time situation that I could do on the weekends and finish up my seminary, so I did. And after I graduated from seminary, we moved then to Neodesha. Well, that got us down to southeast Kansas. Been here ever since. Well, and so, go through all that. But about 10 years ago, we bought a house in Girard. I was thinking that this would be where we would live when we retire. And after all, I needed some place to live when I retire. And so we bought the house. And so far, and we, last summer, moved into the house. And we've been there for 7 months now. Sometimes things do go according to plan. At least they have so far. Who knows? Who knows how that's all going to work out? But we all have no doubt have had times in our life that things happen that we don't plan on. Like I say, job changes. Children come along that maybe we were expecting or not expecting. There might be an illness of some kind that comes along that changes things. The death of a loved one. Lots of things happen in life that we're not planning on yet, Despite all these changes, God is still with us as we go through it all. I was thinking back about 15 years ago or so. I was at a Ministerial Alliance meeting, and the emergency preparedness person for the county was there telling us what their plans were in case of an emergency type situation would come along. And they were planning for various different things. maybe a tornado might go through, which is not uncommon in this part of the world. A train derailment, which the train tracks went through town, and there might be a derail, some toxic chemicals might get spilled. And what are they going to do in a case like that? How would they handle that? Another one was, he mentioned, what would we do in case of a pandemic? They were actually planning 15 years ago. What would we do if there was a pandemic? Actually, he didn't put it that way. He didn't say if there's a pandemic. He said when there is a pandemic. He said there will be one. 15 years ago, somebody said it's not a matter if, it's a matter when. Now, they were thinking it would be something similar to the flu, which, COVID, similar to the flu. One that, a strain that is hard to control, and large numbers of people would be getting this. He said this is, they had a plan, supposedly, anyway, what they were going to do if that ever happened. Well, we know how well that's worked out, don't we? And so here we are. Evidently they were thinking something like that might happen. And a year ago or so, we were going, hey, we've got a vaccine now. We might get this thing under control. We can, the numbers were starting to go down. Not as many people were getting it, and we were getting, we kind of decided that maybe we didn't need these things anymore. That was a year ago. And then, Omicron came along. And we're back at it again, aren't we? We thought the worst was over a year ago. Well, we don't, and we still don't know. We still think maybe we'll get this thing under control. But things happen. People in Colorado didn't expect the wildfire that came along and did the damage that it did. A few years back, the people in Joplin probably didn't expect a major tornado to hit. And for a lot of our churches right now, things are not doing all that well, partly because of the coronavirus and partly because of a lot of other reasons, attendance and giving going down. And we wonder, what are we going to do? And I've seen, especially for a lot of our smaller rural churches, and every once in a while, there's one that closes. But, it's not just here in Kansas, or southeast Kansas. It's pretty much across the board. And not just the United Methodist Church. It's several different denominations are experiencing the same thing. And we wonder, and I've seen over the years program after program after program saying, well, here, if we just do this or if we just do that, we can try to solve the problem. And I really haven't seen any of those programs really work out that well. So we're kind of in that situation right now. But one thing about it, despite all these changes, despite all the things that are going on with with the churches and with the coronavirus and whatever happens, God is with us. God is faithful. He didn't promise us that he's going to keep these things from happening to us. And we look through the history of the last 2,000 years, we'd say. Lots of things have happened. People have gone through lots of different things. There have been plagues, there have been earthquakes, there have been wars, on and on and on. But God has been faithful. And he has been here. He didn't promise that he would keep these things from happening, but he promised he would be here with us as all these things happen. And God is faithful. And we think of Joseph was faithful to do what God told him to do, going to Egypt. And we, too, need to listen to God and what does God want us to do so that we can be faithful to God. And God will be faithful to us to help us as we go through all the things that we go through in life. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is Romans 8:28. It says, we know all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Doesn't mean that everything that happens is good, but that God can bring good from the things that happen. That's a good thing. And that God will bring those good things about for us. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you that you are here with me today, and we just hope that you'll have received a blessing from this. We'll close with a word of prayer. Lord, be with us. Help us as we go through this time. We know that you are here for us, that you guide us, you lead us, and you help us in all that we do. For in your name we pray. Amen.